high school, and my folks smuggled my cousin across the border. I made this decision not to help because the last time my dad smuggled folks, a man died in the trunk of his car because it flipped at the end of a high-speed car chase with the police, and he caught 3 years. Unintentional manslaughter. So they all went without me, and my decision not to participate in Fed crime fam time resulted in my being disinvited to my little sister's quinceañera. On the night of the nicest party my folks had ever thrown, I got dumped at family camp with the church I was a part of instead, alone. A family from church picked me up and threw me in the back of their van. All the happy families scrambled to assemble their plastic sheet houses and unload their vans full of room heaters, beddings, lamps, radios, so they could rough it together. One nice church dad had brought a huge tent just for me. He pitched it himself with probably the same feeling one would get from building a tiny house in the backyard for the stray the kids had brought home. I slept alone in a gigantic tent with one blanket that offered no protection from the cold mountain air and the freezing ground. It was like the ripped condom of blankets. I couldn't sleep with my teeth chattering, so I watched my breath float around my empty tarp house and rummaged through my overnight bag for clothes to wrap around my head and feet. When Kaylee Anthony's body was discovered flung into the woods wrapped in a single blanket and a trash bag, I could relate. The next day, I came home to a trashed house with cops parked in front. My mom told me that my older sister had brought some grown men gangster friends to the party, and they jumped a 16-year-old boy who was a guest at the party. The gangsters recognized him as the younger brother of a rival gang member. He spent a couple days in the hospital with a concussion, and his doctors pulled him out of the rest of the football season. At the time, I was a manager for the Sweetwater football team. He played JV. A week later at practice, he walked up slow with a little bit of side to side like Mac Dre's Life's a Bitch was playing in his head. Turned in his equipment to me. He didn't say a word, just looked me in the face, shoulders back, head up, eyes glossy with disappointment and surrender. I wanted to throw myself on the floor and beg his forgiveness, but all I said was, "I'm really sorry." He handed me the pads and helmet like they were empty vessels, with all the hope and expectations of playing his way out of this goddamn town had been shook out of him. He turned around and walked away, shaking his head. Back then, I loved to discuss movies or experiences, bus rides, anything that could start a conversation, and my family hated it. If we watched a movie in the living room, the credits would roll, and I would only yell out, "You know what I really liked," before my mom would scream, "Shut the fuck up! You always want to fucking talk." I was 15 when my older sister and my mom started selling grass out of our duplex. I came home one day early, and the TV guides and remote controls usually scattered on the coffee table had been replaced with scales, cash, and plastic bags. "What is this?" "April, shut the fuck up. You always have some shit to say." I stomped to my room, sat on my bed, and started a round of this little game I used to play that I'd made up, where I would pretend I was talking to my kids, raising them in a more gentle way. "Your father and I." It felt like every day of my 10th grade year I'd come home from water polo practice to my dad, who would always sort of bait me into talking back so he could justify a fight by saying I was out of control. The fight would start over anything. I would stay up too long doing homework at the dinner table, and he'd pick up a frying pan and tell me to hit it with him and announce he wasn't afraid to go back to prison. Sometimes after he did kick my ass, the school counselor would call me in so Mr. Campus Pig could take pictures of my bruises and then sit on them. But all good things come to an end, and when I was 17, my dad took off with everything in our one-bedroom apartment he thought might be of some value. The 10-year-old VCR, the 5 CD disc player, and the family computer, which we got for free because it was worthless. I estimate his cash gain at like $15, which he used to move to Nevada. And then 1 week later, I was told by my mom that she and my sister were moving to Florida that night without me. Everything I have ever done since I've been on my own has been so that no one would know any of this ever happened. I didn't take a single sip of alcohol till after graduation, and I worked at In-N-Out for 5 years till I was eligible for financial aid for college at 23. I got myself into therapy. I went to church with rich white people because they had class. They were engineers, doctors, and graduate degrees, had graduate degrees on books of the Bible. Conflict started with citations of authors and ended without spilling a drop of whoop ass. They had clear family roles that they played out. The women were feminine, like without even trying. And I wanted all of that. I moved away from National City to Chula Vista, then North Park and Mission Valley and Bonita. And finally, I rented a room in this beautiful house from an amazing couple I'd met at an art show, Mr. and Mrs. Tapia. They were both award-winning activists, 50-something, and they smiled when they met people, and when they'd walk away from a crowd, someone would inevitably say, "Oh my God, they are so sweet. No, they are really great, really nice people." They toiled together at a battered women's shelter they had founded and operated together. They wore robes in the mornings and ate organic yogurt because it matters where you get your dairy from. The room I rented had perfectly clean carpets and a breeze. The kitchen was fully equipped, pots hanging down from hooks, matching chrome appliances, and an antique gas stove. They had a big ceramic bowl on the dinner table full of those long, skinny eggplants and those big purple tomatoes they have at farmers markets. I put my bananas and oranges on the table next to their fruit bowl, and the next day, there was another fruit bowl with my fruits in it. This is how I deserve to live. I paid my rent 6 months in advance to show that I was responsible, and because I knew they were renting the room because they needed the money. April, this is your big chance. You're gonna be middle class now, baby. It's all coming together. Do not fuck this up. Immediately, I started fucking it up. They owned a fully operational dryer, but hung clothes on lines to dry them. I would always be too tired from school or work to bring in my clothes after hanging them to dry and end up leaving them overnight, and I'd find them in a pile on my bed the next day. Laundry fail. Before I moved in, I'd let Miss Tapia know that I enjoyed the company of gentlemen frequently and asked if that was okay. She said it was, but the morning after my second conjugal visit, Miss Tapia let me know, "This isn't going to work out with you having boys over. Who's in my house? I don't feel safe. I suck at being a lady." I did my best to live like them. I memorized which foods go in the compost. I learned what could be recycled. I reused tinfoil. I started shopping at Trader Joe's. I was so busy beating myself up for not being what they wanted me to be or how they wanted to be, that not a single red flag caught my attention. Sometimes the wireless connection would fuck up and I would go to the Tapia's office and reset the router. The first week I lived there, I unplugged the router and when Mr. Tapia was online. He saw what I had done and pounded his hands on the desk. "God fucking shit!" I tucked my head down and left the room. I was so offended, I considered moving out right then. But I figured it's a one-time thing. I should have asked. My fault. Maybe he doesn't know boundaries, no big deal. But Mr. Tapia had a temper. In the morning, I would wake up to him screaming in the office, "Fuck that asshole, I'll fuck him in the ass!" I made excuses for him. The life of an activist is so hard. As long as he's not yelling at me. My philosophy is if you're not hungry and you've got a roof over your head and no one's hitting you, then you're fine. The Tapias made a record of when I failed to wipe the bathroom sink after washing my hands. They checked to see if there were crumbs on the bottom of the toaster oven after I used it, and when they found some, they left me a note asking me not to use it anymore. They had counted how many times I vacuumed the room. The count on the note they left on my door was, absolutely never times. Aside from a handful of shitty notes posted in the kitchen by Mrs. Tapia, they never really said anything to me. Just a bunch of dirty looks and tension that felt like an icy shoulder rub when I stepped out of my room. They worked from home, and therefore they were always there and always disapproving. I would have done anything to make them accept me, to make them respect me. I wanted acceptance into the world they represented so bad I could taste it in every bite of my vegan flaxseed scones. But they just kept counting my crimes and letting their frustrations grow until one Sunday morning when Mr. Tapia handed me a big fat flashback. I'd come into his office and asked him if the internet was working. He slammed his hands on his desk and stood up and started hollering, "You think you own this place? This is my house. When are you moving?" He started coming towards me. My hips squared with him, my feet came apart, and my knees bent automatic, like those seatbelts that hook when you shut the car door. There was an ironing board in the office between him and me, and he picked it up like it was a weapon. I was 15 again, shouting at my dad, "You don't fucking scare me!" Standing my ground like a threatened dog, knowing better than to turn my back on an angry man. He couldn't fold the ironing board while he was yelling, so he dropped it and came at me. Fast. I've been here before. "You're a stupid bitch!" He raised his hand up, and nothing had changed. About my life, about where I was, nothing about me has changed. And I learned from growing up with some Mexican thugs that you're not supposed to flinch, so I didn't. And his hand came down, and he just put it in my face, like, talk to the hand. Think Jerry Springer mixed with that moment Mr. Miyagi had mercy on the teacher from the Cobra Kai dojo. I moved out that day, leaving my stuff behind till I could get a friend to help me get it. I had just been threatened by, like, the nicest man in the world. I spent the whole week thinking, I'm so fucking ghetto. Even good people front up on me. I suck at being civilized. I talked to a handful of close friends who said I should have just walked away. But none of those people have ever been attacked by a grown man. I felt like such a fucking hood rat. I was so embarrassed about it. I decided not to tell anyone else what happened when they asked why I was staying with my friend. Mrs. Tapia sent me emails after the confrontation. First nice ones, trying to excuse Mr. Tapia. He's got financial problems, he's stressed, he's used to things in a certain way. You left your pan out and didn't wipe the sink before you left. When I didn't respond to the emails, they got meaner. Over the next few months, I kept trying to see things their way, trying to understand why I deserve to be treated that way. I've been dressing up the outside of my life. I bought a French press because it gives you a more authentic coffee flavor. I bought 3 pairs of skinny jeans and some snakeskin pattern heels because I saw another girl wearing them. She has a master's in a house. I just want to look like I made it. Anything to prove that I was gone from the ghetto. Of course, I never deserved any of what I got. Not when I was a kid, and certainly not as a woman. But I don't always believe it, because my ghetto still exists in my head, and I take it everywhere with me. In this bar, in a fancy restaurant, and that's why I'm telling this story. Because it's only when I say it out loud and hear the story like it's someone else's that I can really get that that little girl deserved better. And I wish I could sit with her and tell her, your father and I... Thank you.
That was April Ventura.